You need to understand something, his father said, standing up at the head of the table. Before this goes any further. The room went silent. My fiancé didn't look at me. And what I saw next changed everything. I'm 27 years old. My name is Anna. And until that dinner, I truly believed I was building a life with the man I loved. We met 4 years earlier, at a charity fundraiser in Boston. He was confident, polished, the kind of man people naturally listen to. Mark Reynolds. 32. Corporate strategy consultant. MBA. Family money, but he never said it directly. He didn't have to. I worked in digital content production. Freelance. Commercial shoots, branded storytelling, sometimes social campaigns. It paid well. Better than well, actually. Some months I made more than Mark. But that was never the version of me he shared. To the outside world, especially his family, I was between things. Exploring creative options. Not really settled yet. Temporary. Mark never said it with cruelty. Not openly. It was always wrapped in concern. They just won't understand what you do, he told me once, adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. My parents are traditional. I laughed it off. I always laughed it off. When he proposed last spring, private terrace, candlelight, the Charles River glowing below, I said yes without hesitation. I believed in us. In the future he described so beautifully. House. Stability. Respect. What I didn't notice then was how often that future never included my work. Or my name attached to anything real. The first time I sensed something was wrong was subtle. Almost invisible. At a dinner with his sister Claire, she asked me, smiling politely, "So, are you still doing that little online thing?" Little. Mark cut in quickly. She's experimenting. You know how creative types are. I felt heat rise to my face. But I said nothing. Later that night, I told him it bothered me. You're overthinking it, he said calmly. They don't mean harm. And honestly, Anna, your work isn't exactly permanent. Permanent. That word stuck to me like something damp and cold. Over the next months, it became a pattern. At family events, I was introduced vaguely. This is Anna. No last name. No profession. Once, when his mother asked directly what I did, Mark laughed softly and said, "She's figuring it out." I remember sitting there, hands folded in my lap, nodding like it was true. The worst part wasn't them. It was me. I let it happen. Because behind closed doors, Mark was different. Affectionate. Protective. Convincing. I just want to keep things simple, he told me. Until we're married. Then everything will make sense. So I stayed quiet. I played smaller than I was. I allowed them to believe I depended on him. I even started dressing differently around his family. Softer. More neutral. Less visible. The dinner that changed everything was supposed to be a celebration. Mark's father, Richard Reynolds, was turning 60. Big milestone. Private dining room at an old, prestigious restaurant near Beacon Hill. Dark wood. Heavy curtains. The kind of place where money whispered instead of shouting. Everyone was there. Parents. Sister. 2 uncles. Family friends I'd never met but instantly recognized as powerful. I wore a simple black dress. No statement jewelry. No conversation-starting details. I had learned. The evening began politely. Wine. Toasts. Stories about Mark as a child. About legacy. About the Reynolds name. I smiled when expected. I spoke when spoken to. Mark barely touched my hand. Halfway through the main course, Richard stood up. He was tall, silver-haired, commanding without raising his voice. When he stood, people listened. "I'd like to ask a question," he said, looking directly at me. My stomach tightened. "This is the woman you plan to marry, Mark?" he asked his son, but his eyes never left mine. "Yes," Mark replied quickly. Too quickly. Richard nodded slowly. "Anna," he said. "Tell me something." The fork slipped slightly in my hand. "What exactly do you do?" The table went quiet. I opened my mouth. Mark spoke first. She's. Richard raised his hand. I asked her. My heart started pounding. Loud. Uncontrolled. I could feel everyone watching me now. Measuring. Evaluating. I told the truth. Calmly. Clearly. I described my work. The companies. The campaigns. The revenue. I didn't brag. I didn't apologize. When I finished, Richard didn't react immediately. He looked at Mark instead. That's not what you told us, he said. The air changed. Mark laughed nervously. Well, I simplified. Richard turned back to me. So you're not dependent on my son? He asked. The word hit the table like a dropped glass. I felt something shift inside my chest. Something sharp. Before I could answer, Richard said quietly. Because we've been operating under the impression that you were. Mark's face drained of color. No one spoke. And then Richard said the sentence I still hear in my sleep. Anna, before you marry into this family, you deserve to know why that impression was important. I couldn't breathe. Mark stood up abruptly. Dad, this isn't the time. Richard ignored him. There are decisions being made, he continued, voice steady. Plans that assume you will remain flexible. Flexible. I looked at Mark. Really looked at him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I realized something was deeply, terrifyingly wrong. I had thought I was being underestimated. I didn't yet understand that I was being positioned. And that night wasn't about a birthday at all. It was about control. If this story shocked you already, take a moment, hit like and subscribe, because what I uncovered after that dinner was far worse than humiliation. It was deliberate. And it had been planned long before I ever said yes that I didn't sleep that night. Mark lay beside me, breathing evenly, as if nothing had happened. As if his father hadn't just cracked open something that refused to close again. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every second of that dinner, every word that had been said, and the ones that hadn't. Flexible. That word echoed in my head. In the morning, Mark acted normal. Too normal. He made coffee. Kissed my forehead. Asked if I wanted almond milk or oat. He spoke about a client meeting in New York, about flights, about nothing that mattered. I waited for him to explain. He didn't. When I finally brought it up, carefully, he sighed like a tired parent. You're reading too much into it, he said. My father likes control. He tests people. That's all. Why did he think I depended on you? I asked. Mark didn't hesitate. Because it's easier that way. Easier. For who? I asked. For them, he replied, gently. And honestly, for us. I felt that familiar twist in my stomach, the one I'd learned to ignore. The one that whispered something was wrong while my mind rushed to excuse it. They don't respect women who float, he continued. I was protecting you. Protecting me by shrinking me. I didn't argue. Not then. I nodded, like I always did. I told myself this was just a misunderstanding. A generational thing. A class thing. Gaslighting doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives wrapped in logic. Over the next weeks, I started noticing things I'd once dismissed. Mark had always encouraged me to keep my finances simple. It's messy when couples keep things separate, he'd said. Let me handle the big picture. At the time, it felt reassuring. Mature. Loving. Now, it felt calculated. I realized his family had no idea how much I earned. Or that I owned my apartment outright. Or that I'd turned down a full-time executive role to stay independent. None of that fit the story. The story they knew was cleaner. Anna. Creative. Unstable income. Grateful to be chosen. Temporary. At a brunch with his mother a few days later, she leaned across the table and smiled kindly. You're very lucky, she said. Mark will take such good care of you. I smiled back. Yes, I said. I'm very lucky. That night, I checked something I hadn't checked in years. My credit report. Everything was clean. Too clean. No joint accounts. No shared liabilities. Except one thing. An inquiry I didn't recognize. Dated 6 months earlier. A business-related background check. Requested by a private firm. Not mine. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe Mark had checked something on my behalf. Maybe it was standard. Still, I screenshot it. Then I started listening more carefully. Mark took more phone calls outside. Lowered his voice when I entered rooms. Once, I caught the word timeline before he stopped mid-sentence. Another time, I heard him say, "She doesn't need to know yet." When I asked what that was about, he smiled. "Work stuff," he said. "You wouldn't be interested. You wouldn't understand." That phrase used to sound harmless. Now it felt like a door closing. The real shift happened on a Sunday afternoon. Mark was in the shower. His laptop was open on the kitchen counter. A message notification popped up on the screen. I wasn't trying to snoop. I truly wasn't. But I saw my name. Anna, contingency. My hands went cold. I stared at the screen, heart racing, knowing I was crossing a line, and knowing I couldn't stop. The email thread was short. Professional. Clinical. Assuming Anna Reynolds will not contest the initial structure, we proceed as discussed. Her current income profile supports the dependency narrative. Dependency narrative. I felt sick. The sender was a law firm I recognized. One Mark's family had used for years. I didn't read further. I couldn't. When Mark came out of the shower, I was sitting at the table, laptop closed, my face carefully neutral. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said. "Just tired." That night, I lay awake again, piecing things together. They weren't just underestimating me. They were defining me. Creating a version of me that fit their plans. A version that didn't ask questions. Didn't challenge structures. Didn't have leverage. The next week, I tested something. At a family gathering, I casually mentioned a project I was leading for a major brand. I dropped the name lightly. Not to impress. Just to exist. Mark stiffened. Later, in the car, he snapped. "Why would you say that?" he asked. "Say what?" I replied calmly. "You made it sound like you're independent," he said. "Like you don't need me." I looked at him. "I don't," I said. Silence filled the car. "That's not the point," he said finally. "The point is perception." Perception. That word again. That night, he apologized. Flowers. Soft voice. Familiar script. "I just want harmony," he said. "You're imagining threats that aren't there." But the evidence kept stacking up. I found an old draft of a prenuptial agreement in his email trash. One I'd never seen. One that assumed minimal assets on my side. I found messages between his sister and mother discussing how unstable careers complicate things. I found a calendar invite titled Post-Marriage Restructuring. Every time I confronted Mark, he had an answer. A smooth one. A reassuring one. "You're paranoid. You're emotional. You're projecting your insecurities." Gaslighting works because part of you wants it to be true. I wanted to believe him. But then came the moment I couldn't ignore. I was at my apartment, organizing old files, when I found a contract from 3 years ago. A deal I'd signed early in my career. Back then, Mark had insisted I route the payment through an account he helped set up. "I know finance," he'd said. "Trust me." I checked the account now. It wasn't mine anymore. The ownership had been quietly transferred. Months ago. My name was still there. Barely. Symbolically. The controlling interest wasn't. I sat on the floor, contract in my shaking hands, understanding something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't about love. This was about positioning me as a non-threat. About making sure that when the time came, I wouldn't fight back. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I closed the folder. Put everything back exactly as it was. And for the first time since I met Mark Reynolds, I stopped asking myself what he was hiding from me. I started asking what he was preparing for. If this story is pulling you in, stay with me. Like and subscribe, because the next thing I discovered wasn't just a warning. It was proof. And it led me straight to the point of no return that I needed certainty. Not suspicion. Not intuition. Not that tight feeling in my chest I'd learned to doubt. I needed proof. So I waited. I stopped asking questions. I smiled more. I leaned into the version of myself they preferred, the agreeable one, the grateful one, the woman who didn't look too closely at the frame she was being placed into. Mark relaxed. That was my first confirmation. When predators think you've gone quiet, they stop hiding. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One evening, Mark told me he needed to attend a confidential strategy session with his father and their legal advisor. He said it casually, like it was nothing. Like I wouldn't be interested. They'll be at the office, he said, grabbing his coat. Long night. I nodded. Don't wait up, I replied. As soon as the door closed, I moved. I already knew where his father's private office was. I'd been there once, dark-paneled, soundproofed, hidden behind a biometric lock in a building Mark's family partly owned. I also knew something Mark didn't. 6 months earlier, when his father had insisted on modernizing security, I'd helped consult on a digital content project for the same firm that installed the system. I remembered the model. I remembered its flaws. And I remembered the temporary override code used during maintenance. I didn't hesitate long enough to feel fear. I took a cab. The building was quiet when I arrived. Too quiet. Security nodded at me without question, they recognized my face. I'd been there enough times to be invisible. The office door opened with a soft click. Inside, the lights were dim. The air smelled faintly of leather and old paper. I closed the door behind me and locked it. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Richard Reynolds' office wasn't just a workspace. It was an archive. Shelves of documents. Framed awards. Discrete safes built into the walls. Power leaves records. I started with the desk. Top drawer. Nothing. Second drawer. Contracts. Third drawer, locked. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I remembered every detail Mark had ever shared casually. Every complaint about his father's habits. Richard reused codes. The drawer slid open. Inside were folders. Labeled neatly. Strategically. One of them had my name. Not Anna. Anna Reynolds. Future tense. My breath caught. I opened it. The first document was a financial projection. Post-marriage asset consolidation. It listed Mark's projected income, family trusts, real estate holdings. And then, under my name. Expected personal income decline, 12 to 18 months post-marriage. Professional disengagement likely following relocation. Legal dependency status, favorable. I felt cold spread through my body. They hadn't just assumed I'd stop working. They'd planned for it. The next page detailed a timeline. Engagement. Marriage. Relocation to a state with more flexible marital property laws. Joint accounts. Gradual withdrawal from independent contracts. There was a note in the margin. Ensure narrative remains consistent, Anna prioritizes family. I had to sit down. This wasn't manipulation. This was engineering. I flipped the page. A section titled, Risk Management. My name appeared again. Low probability of resistance. Psychological profile indicates compliance when framed as stability and protection. Psychological profile. My hands started shaking. They had studied me. There were references to interviews I'd never knowingly given. To assessments. To behavioral tendencies. Notes about my background. My need for approval. My fear of conflict. Things I hadn't even admitted to myself. I kept reading. And then I saw it. A correspondence memo from the same law firm whose name I'd seen before. Should Anna become non-compliant, proceed with contingency. Contingency. I remembered the email. My stomach turned. I opened the contingency section. It was short. Efficient. Chilling. If I resisted asset consolidation, Mark would initiate a narrative of instability. Emotional volatility. Career burnout. Concern for my mental health. If needed, a private clinician, already identified, would support the assessment. I felt dizzy. They were prepared to discredit me. Legally. Socially. Professionally. All under the guise of concern. I thought of every time Mark had told me I was overthinking. Emotional. Sensitive. This wasn't accidental language. It was rehearsal. I took photos of everything. Every page. Every note. My phone barely made a sound. Then I heard voices. My heart slammed against my ribs. The hallway. Keys. Laughter. I moved fast. I returned everything exactly as it was. Closed the drawer. Smoothed the desk. I stood, forcing my breathing to slow. The door opened. Richard entered first. Then Mark. Then a man I didn't recognize, mid-50s, expensive suit, legal calm in his eyes. They froze when they saw me. Anna? Mark said, stunned. What are you doing here? I smiled. I forgot my charger, I said lightly. You said you'd be late. Richard studied me carefully. Too carefully. You shouldn't be here, he said. I know, I replied. I was just leaving. The lawyer watched me like I was a variable he hadn't calculated for. I walked past them slowly. Calmly. Every step measured. No one stopped me. The elevator ride down felt endless. When I reached the street, the night air hit me like a wave. That's when my knees buckled. I sat on the curb, phone clutched in my hand, and finally let myself feel it. The betrayal wasn't just Mark. It was everyone. Every smile. Every polite dinner. Every comment about stability. They hadn't seen me as a person. I was a component. A manageable risk. That night, Mark didn't come home. He texted instead. Long meeting. Don't worry. Love you. I stared at the message, thinking of the folder. Of the plans. Of the version of me they were so confident would comply. I typed back. Love you too. And that was the moment everything changed. Because I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't confused. I wasn't questioning my sanity. I had crossed the point of no return. They thought they were preparing for my obedience. They had no idea they'd just trained me for war. Fear didn't disappear all at once. It peeled away. Layer by layer. The night after I left Richard's office, I stood in the shower until the water went cold, replaying every document, every sentence burned into my memory. Not because I doubted what I saw, but because I needed to memorize it. Internalize it. Turn shock into structure. They had a plan. So I built one too. The first rule was silence. I didn't confront Mark. I didn't cry. I didn't accuse. I became easier. I let him believe the meeting had exhausted me. I let him talk about his work, about pressure, about how lucky we were to have each other. I nodded at the right moments. I touched his arm when he spoke. I smiled when his mother called. Compliance is camouflage. The second rule was documentation. I backed up every photo from Richard's office to 3 separate encrypted drives. One cloud-based, registered under a shell account. One physical drive hidden at my apartment. One given to a person Mark didn't know existed. Her name was Julia. We'd worked together years ago on a political media campaign. Smart. Discreet. She now worked in investigative consulting, background checks, financial tracing, quiet exposure. When I told her I needed help, I didn't give details. I didn't have to. She heard my voice. Bring me everything, she said. So I did. What we found over the next weeks was worse than the documents alone suggested. The Reynolds family didn't just protect their image. They monetized it. Shell companies. Trusts layered like mirrors. Assets shifted through marriages, divorces, relocations. Women entered the family with careers. Left with transitional support. Never lawsuits. Never scandals. Just erosion. One former wife had been labeled emotionally unstable. Another had quietly relocated overseas. Another signed an NDA so airtight it erased her online existence for years. Patterns don't lie. And suddenly, I wasn't special. I was next. The third rule was leverage. I needed witnesses. Records. Timelines that couldn't be dismissed as paranoia or emotion. So I leaned into their expectations. I talked about slowing down at work. About maybe taking fewer projects. I let Mark suggest that marriage might be a natural reset. You deserve peace, he told me. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, maybe you're right. That was the moment he relaxed completely. He started leaving documents open. Taking calls in front of me. Assuming I wasn't listening. He underestimated how observant quiet women become. I recorded conversations. Not illegally, strategically. I let him explain things in his own words. About money. About timing. About alignment. Once, after a glass of wine too many, he said something that still makes my skin crawl. My dad likes things clean, he said. No surprises. That's why you're perfect. Perfect. Because I didn't challenge him. Because I didn't scare him. Because I made myself smaller so he could feel larger. I filed that sentence away. Julia traced the private clinician named in the contingency plan. Found prior affiliations. Found patterns of convenient diagnoses tied to divorce proceedings. We found drafts of affidavits. Pre-written concerns. Language that mirrored phrases Mark had used on me casually. You're emotional. You're overwhelmed. You need rest. This wasn't spontaneous concern. It was scripting. By the time the engagement party approached, a large, formal event planned by Richard himself, I knew exactly what it was. A stage. Everyone important would be there. Business partners. Attorneys. Family friends. Politicians. People who believed in the Reynolds narrative. And people who mattered. If this story is gripping you now, pause for 1 second. Like. Subscribe. Stay with me, because what happens next wasn't revenge. It was exposure. The days leading up to the party, I played my role flawlessly. I wore what they liked. I spoke when prompted. I let Mark talk over me. I thanked his mother for her guidance. Inside, I was counting down. Julia coordinated quietly. She ensured copies of the evidence were time-stamped, notarized, and stored with third-party custodians. She looped in a journalist known for financial ethics reporting. Not tabloids. Not gossip. Credibility. I didn't want to destroy them emotionally. I wanted to dismantle the system that made them confident. The night of the party, I wore white. Not bridal. Intentional. The venue was elegant. Glass walls. City lights. A long table of speeches prepared. Richard looked proud. Mark looked invincible. I watched him greet people, shake hands, introduce me with that same vague phrasing. This is Anna. No title. No context. Temporary. When it was time for speeches, Richard stood up first. He talked about legacy. About family values. About trust. I listened calmly, knowing what he didn't. Every word he spoke contradicted the documents he'd signed. Then Mark stood. He spoke about partnership. About support. About how grateful he was for a woman who understood priorities. I smiled at him. And then, before the applause could settle, I stood too. There was a murmur. Confusion. Surprise. Mark turned, eyes wide. Anna, he whispered. I'd like to say something, I said clearly. Richard stiffened. This isn't planned, he said quietly. I looked at him. No, I replied. It isn't. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I spoke like someone who had nothing to lose, and everything documented. I talked about love. About trust. About how important it is to enter marriage honestly. About how dangerous it is when power hides behind concern. I watched faces shift. Then I said his name. Not Mark's. Richard's. I asked him, publicly, to explain the financial projections he'd prepared assuming my professional disengagement. I asked him to clarify the contingency plan designed to question my mental stability. The room went silent. Mark stood up abruptly. "Stop," he said. "This is inappropriate." I looked at him. "What's inappropriate?" I said calmly. "Is planning my erasure while smiling at my face." People were recording now. Whispering. Turning toward Richard. The lawyer I'd seen in the office was there. Pale. Frozen. I named the clinician. I named the firm. I named the accounts. I didn't need to show documents. They knew. That's the thing about truth. The people who are guilty recognize it instantly. Security stepped forward, but not toward me. Toward Richard. Because Julia had done one more thing. She'd contacted authorities, not with accusations, but with documentation of financial irregularities unrelated to me. Marriage schemes were just one thread. The web was much larger. As officers entered the room, Mark finally looked at me, not with anger. With fear. That's when I leaned close and said quietly, so only he could hear. That's when I stopped being afraid. And for the first time since I met him. He knew exactly who he'd underestimated. The room didn't explode. It froze. That's the part people never expect. No screaming. No dramatic collapse. Just silence so thick it felt physical, like pressure on my ears. Richard Reynolds didn't speak. He didn't need to. His face, controlled for decades, had finally betrayed him. A small tightening around the eyes. A calculation running too fast to hide. Mark was still standing beside me, his hand hovering in the air as if he might grab my arm. "Stop this, rewind time." He didn't touch me. He knew better now. The officers moved with professional calm. No rush. No spectacle. They asked Richard to step aside. Then the lawyer. Then another man I recognized from the documents, someone whose name I'd memorized long before tonight. Guests began whispering. Phones were fully out now. The Reynolds narrative, polished, untouchable, was cracking in real time. Mark finally spoke. "This is a misunderstanding," he said loudly, too loudly. "My fiancé is under a lot of stress." There it was. The script. I turned to face him slowly. "Don't," I said. "Just one word." He stopped. Because everyone was watching now. I addressed the room again, not to accuse, not to beg, but to clarify. "I won't be discussing my personal relationship further," I said. "But I will say this, if you've ever wondered how powerful families protect themselves without breaking laws, you're watching it. No drama. No insults. Just truth, spoken clearly." Richard finally found his voice. "You're making a mistake," he said, looking at me with something close to pity. "You don't understand the consequences." I smiled. "Oh," I said softly. "I do." The officers escorted him out first. Mark watched his father disappear through the glass doors, and something in him collapsed. Not love. Not loyalty. Control. He turned to me then, desperation breaking through the polish. "We can fix this," he whispered. "We'll talk. We'll reset. You don't have to do this." I leaned closer. "I already did," I replied. "You just didn't notice." I walked out alone. The night air felt unreal. Lighter. As if I'd been holding my breath for years without knowing it. The days that followed moved fast. Too fast. Accounts frozen. Investigations announced. Unrelated financial inquiries, the headline said. That's how it always starts. Mark called me. Then texted. Then emailed. Long messages. Apologies layered with subtle blame. "You forced my hand. You didn't give me time. We could have handled this privately." Privately. Where I would have lost. I didn't respond. My lawyer did. The engagement was formally dissolved. No drama. No public statements from me. I didn't need them. The evidence spoke on its own. A week later, I received a message from one of the women Julia had tracked down, one of the former wives. Just 3 sentences. I saw the news. I'm glad someone finally said it out loud. Thank you. I cried then. Not from pain. From release. The Reynolds family didn't disappear overnight. Power never does. But it fractured. Partnerships quietly dissolved. Boards requested explanations. Invitations stopped coming. People who once praised their values suddenly remembered concerns. Mark resigned from his firm to focus on personal matters. I heard he moved cities. I didn't look him up. I didn't need closure from him. I already had something better. Peace. I moved apartments. Not because I had to, but because I wanted a space untouched by compromise. I took on projects I'd once declined. I spoke openly about my work. My name, finally attached to what I built. No one introduced me vaguely anymore. They asked questions. They listened. Sometimes people ask if I regret not seeing the signs earlier. No. I see now that survival sometimes looks like silence, until it doesn't. I learned something important through all of this. Family isn't blood. It isn't a last name. It isn't legacy dinners and quiet threats. Family is who doesn't need you to be smaller to feel secure. If this story stayed with you, if it made you uncomfortable in the right way, hit like and subscribe. Not for drama. For awareness. Because control rarely looks like cruelty at first. Sometimes, it looks like love. And the most dangerous lies are the ones told calmly, over dinner, by people who smile while planning your silence.